Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on replacement projects and preparing specifications and bidding and contract administration for these types of projects. My name is Melissa Wrubel. I am an engineer with Kipcon. I've been with Kipcon for about 15 years, and my expertise is in site work. So I've done a number of projects over the years, quite a number of projects actually, regarding any sort of site work projects, paving and drainage improvements, things of that nature. So I've been through a number of projects over the years and through this process, which I'm about to present today. I'm going to move a little quickly because we're going to be covering a lot of material today. So I'll keep my eye on the chat, and if anybody has any questions, I'll stop periodically to answer any questions, and I'll take some questions at the end as well. So what are we going to be talking about today? So obviously we're going to be talking about projects that involve replacement or upgrade of common elements within HOA communities. And there are all types of construction projects. Some are very large and some are just some smaller repair type projects. We're going to talk about who are the parties involved in this process and the actual process of preparing specs and bidding, and who is responsible for what types of activities during contract administration, what goes into the construction documents, and a number of other topics that are related. So within an HOA community, and I would imagine everyone here today is somehow involved with these types of projects for HOA communities, whether you are a property manager or a resident or on the board. These are generally the types of projects that HOAs encounter. Of course, there are many types of common elements, but these are the most common, I would say. Paving and roofing, any kind of building envelope work within communities are usually the more expensive, larger types of projects. But as we can see, there are many other types. There are, decking, retaining walls, and mechanical equipment. So there are any number of reasons why a community association may want to undertake a remediation project. So HOAs should have, or generally typically do have, or required in New Jersey at this point, to have a reserve study prepared every couple of years. So the age of a component within the reserve study may give an indication that it's time to start considering preparing to do certain types of projects. And I'll use, as we move through this webinar, paving projects. It's what I'm very familiar with. And I'll be using various examples of paving projects throughout the webinar today. So if you're looking at your reserve study, and pavement as one of the components would typically have a useful life of 20 years. And as we see the pavement age approaching that mark, we start to consider, well, maybe it is time to replace the pavement. So just because something is approaching its estimated useful life on a reserve study may or may not be an indication that you need to do the project. So it's important to have a reserve study and to budget for those future replacements, because you want to have adequate funding to do that. However, you really should have an engineer evaluate the condition of those components as they age. And there are different indicators that might, but for roofing, the shingles might be starting to become brittle and getting roof leaks as you approach the estimated useful life. With pavement, there are various other indicators like alligator cracking, and multiple repairs, high maintenance costs that might indicate that it's time to do a project. Other types of projects have to do with upgrades. Obviously, as communities age, there are different types of construction techniques and materials that might be more useful or longer lived, or just an aesthetic upgrade that a community might consider. Sometimes, unfortunately, there are disasters and unforeseen weather conditions or adverse events like a fire that can happen, or different types of weather conditions that can damage just by nature of older construction and the way it would handle weather conditions. One of them is ice damming. It has to do with adequate ventilation within the attic space. That can cause damage over time as things age. And when you do a project to replace these things, you want to take these things into consideration, and do construction in a way that will minimize future maintenance and extend the useful life. Those sources of funds for various types of projects, once you decide that it is time to do a remediation project, oftentimes there is enough money in reserves if you are updating your reserves regularly and adequately funding for those reserves when components reach the end of their useful life. There should be, or you plan to have, enough reserves to do those projects. In some cases, a special assessment may need to happen to have enough funds to do a project. Of course, there's also the options of borrowing in the case of something going wrong, like a fire or weather damage, or perhaps earthquake damage. There may be some insurance that money that is available through the insurance policy for such disasters. So, who are the parties that are involved in a construction project? So obviously the owner of the project, and in the case of an HOA, that is the community association. The community association is the owner of the common elements and whatever common element is involved in the construction. The community association manager is the representative for the owner in most cases, and they are the point person for interaction with the design professional and with the construction professional as well. And we'll see that as we move on. The community association's attorney is an important player, especially when it comes to putting a contract in place and contract negotiation. Maybe there's a question involved prior to doing the project as to who is the owner of the various components of the project. One example is I recently had a roadway project in which the owners owned the driveway. I'm sorry, the homeowners owned the driveways, and there needed to be some curb work that was done along the depressed curb at the end of the driveways as part of the roadway project, so that the roadway would have adequate edge support when the pavement was installed, and that required saw cutting into the unit owners' driveways, and there was some questions as to how that would impact unit owners and what they would be responsible for in terms of cost. And the attorney was involved in that discussion. The engineer is also a very important party in the process, in that they prepare the contract drawings and the specifications for the project, and we'll talk a little bit more about what the components of those items are. And then, of course, the contractor is the party that performs the work. One of the things I'm going to stress throughout this webinar is that the contractor contracts directly with the owner, who is the community association represented by the association manager, and the engineer also contracts directly with the community association. The engineer and the contractor do not have a contract with each other, although they are in communication during the project, which is very important. The contractor is responsible for the means and methods. The engineer specifies what needs to be done, and the contractor is responsible to supply the equipment and the personnel and the means and methods of performing the work. So what is the engineer's role? The engineer's role is the construction process consists of a design phase, a bidding phase, and an active construction phase. So the engineer can be involved in all three phases, and that involvement would entail the preparation of any kind of designs and putting together of any general specifications. They can assist during the bidding process with issuing an RFP to the various contractors, whoever is on the bid list. And also they can assist in selecting a contractor based on various considerations. The engineer during the active construction phase can provide project oversight. And again, I want to stress that the contractor and the engineer do not have a contract with each other, and the contractor works directly for the owner, although the engineer would provide oversight for the purpose of checking the work in progress to make sure that it matches what is in the specifications that they had prepared. So during the active construction, the three main players are the owner, the community association, as represented by the property manager, community manager, the design professional, who is typically an engineer or architect, and the contractor themselves, who are performing the work. So again, the unit owner is, or I'm sorry, the common element owner would be the community association, as represented by the community manager. There's often a board who needs to make decisions along the way in terms of selecting a contractor and in terms of being informed during the process. The design professional, again, who contracts directly with the owner, prepares the plans and the specifications, which become part of the contract. And of course, the contractor, who provides the construction services. So again, this is just reiterating that the contracts are between the community association and the engineer, and directly between the contractor and the association. And the defining the portion that defines that relationship between the contractor and the association are the specifications that the engineer has prepared. So let's talk about a little bit about the contracts and why they're important. So the more detailed a contract is, the more that it defines that relationship. So the contract forms the basis for the responsibilities of all the parties involved, and we talked about how that basically entails the owner and the engineer and the contractor. And when things are going very smoothly on a project, where nobody really, I wouldn't say nobody looks at the contract, they're aware of the contract, but the finer points of the contract are typically not invoked when things are going smoothly. Or when problems do occur, especially any kind of warranty issue or any kind of timeline perhaps for the project or materials used, the contract becomes very important, because we would refer to the contract to see what was agreed to. So in the contract between the engineer and the owner, it could be one of several, it could be a combination of several things. On its the most basic contract would be for preparation of the specifications for the project, and for preparing any drawings that are also going to become part of the contract. The scope of services may for the engineer may also entail preparing cost estimates. I would say that if for projects that are going to be bid out and performed right away, you don't need a cost estimate prepared. In some cases, though, there may be several different options for a project, in which case the association might want to look at the cost differential between each of those options, and then make an informed choice based on also including what the cost estimates turn out to be for each of those options. But however, if you're going to do the project in short order, it doesn't really pay to do cost estimates, because you'll be putting that project out to bid, and you'll get actual estimates from, or actual quotes from contractors that you can use as your cost basis. So the engineer can also be involved in that bidding process. Um, the basic bidding process involves putting the specifications out to bid with the contractors and getting the bids back and helping the HOA to make a decision in choosing a contractor. However, could it also include pre-bid meetings in which there is a walkthrough that happens with the contractor to answer any questions that the contractor may have, and that can be an add-on to the contract, or it can be part of the original contract between the engineer and the HOA. And then also part of the bidding services include evaluation of the bids and a bid summary, looking at the received bids from each of the contractor and making a comparison between them and helping using that as the basis for selection of a contractor. The engineer is also involved during active construction in the contract administration services. Again, I want to stress that the engineer is not responsible to tell the contractor how to build something. What the engineer's presence on site is intended to do is look at the work in progress and compare it to the specifications that had been prepared. Sometimes oftentimes, so it's not sometimes, it's almost always during construction, there are unforeseen conditions which arise. In the case of, again, I'll use an example of a pavement project. Once the surface is milled off of the pavement, there may be some base course conditions or underlying soil conditions that were not apparent until the construction was underway and that surface course was milled off. And the change orders that come out of that, the extra work that might need to be done to repair those conditions before the top course can be put back on, need to be reviewed by the engineer. And that's one of the types of services that are provided during contract administration. Also, the preparation of what are called punch lists. And again, construction is often a messy business, and sometimes uh, during the course of the project, there are certain defects or points that need to be revisited by the contractor. Again, in the case of pavement, there might be an area where the pavement was not needs a little more compaction, or a little bit of a grade alteration for drainage purposes on very flat sites. And these become punch list items which the contractor would then address before final payment is released. And again, with contract administration, another service the engineer would provide would be to review the final invoices and approve them when the work of the contractor is complete. So what should the contract between the engineer and the association include? So it should describe obviously the work to be performed, which is the drawings and the specifications, the cost for the design services of the engineer are included, and that's given in the engineer's proposal. The payment terms, if it's is it a lump sum? Are you paying the engineer a lump sum for those design services, or will it be time and expense? Typically, the preparation of specifications is a lump sum cost. Bidding services are often a lump sum cost. The contract administration services are typically at time and expense. If there is a very defined scope to the project, oftentimes the engineer can provide a time estimate or provide a maximum fee. You're still being charged at time and expense, but there's a cap to it. And if there is a cap to it, the engineer may define a little more precisely what services are included, such as maybe number of site visits, or time spent on site, or something of that nature. If there's a dispute between the engineer and the owner, what are the terms of resolving that dispute? Does the engineer have a certain period of time to resolve any issues between the engineer and the owner? And what are the terms of that? And if there's additional work that's unforeseen at the time that the contract is put in place, How will that extra work be handled? Will it be time and expense? One example is during the bidding phase, as I mentioned, meetings on site with the contractor, walkthroughs with the contractor that are pre-bid are often not included in the base contract, but they're offered at time and expense. So if the owner decides that during the bidding process that they would prefer to have a walkthrough meeting with all the contractors and have the engineer in attendance, the engineer would, as stipulated by the contract, charge them time and expense for that attendance at that meeting. And also the contract should include limits of liability. If something were to happen, if there was an injury, what are the limits of liability? So what do the construction documents include? So as I mentioned before, these would typically include design drawings, which are the plans that you see, the blueprints, as many people call them. They're often prepared electronically and come in larger sheets, and there's several sheets to the set. And then there's often a separate portion that are the written specifications, and it's a booklet, typically called a project manual, which contains several different sections, and we'll go through what's included in the specifications, the written portion of the specifications. So the design drawings are a graphical representation of the work that needs to be done. And whether it's if the architectural plans, if they are architectural design drawings meant for a building project, that might be for, say, a roofing project or a siding project or an alteration to an existing framing of a building, say, you would have some architectural design drawings. If there are any changes that are happening to the structure of a building or to any of the MEP, mechanical, electrical, or plumbing portions of a building, or if it's site work, pavement, concrete work, retaining walls, you would have a set of engineering design drawings. And then the written portion, as I mentioned, are the written specifications for the project. And there are several sections that are included in the specifications. So the specifications are in some ways summarize what's shown in the design drawings, and it gives a narrative of what the intention of the project is. It outlines the project in a narrative step by step as to what the construction sequence is and what's included in the scope of work. And again, the specifications are not intended to address the means or methods, which is the responsibility of the contractor. So for example, you'll never see in the design drawings or the specifications any type of equipment that the contractor should use, or the type and size of the crews that should be used, or a schedule that the contractor must stick to in his construction process. So these are the responsibility of the contractor, and they are to be defined by the contractor prior to the start of work. So when a bid package is put together and it consists of the design drawings and the written specifications, we'll put out an RFP, or request for proposal. And this is an advertisement to bid. So once the specifications are prepared and the owner has had a chance to review them, and I always include in our scope of work in the contract between the engineer and the owner, that if requested, we'll attend one meeting to go over the specifications and what's been prepared and what the scope of work is. And I always like to make sure that everybody understands what the scope of work is and what the basic scope of work is and what the potential extras might be before we go into the project, and what the potential costs of those might be. And I think that's important because because once construction starts and everything is underway, everyone is committed. So it's important for everyone involved to understand what the scope of work is before you put the work out to bid. So the advertisement for bid or RFP defines several things. There's usually a cover letter that's included with the bid documents, and it'll give a date for when the bids are due, and define whether there is any sort of walkthrough with contractors and what date that might take place. The cover letter gives a point of contact to call or to email or to get in touch with before they enter the site. And if there are any specific questions for the contractors, they're included in that as well. So also included is if the contractor has any questions, who should they contact? Should they contact the engineer? Should they contact the site manager? And when they want to submit their bid, in what form should those bids be submitted? Are there duplicates required? Who should get copies of any bid forms that are submitted? And the request also includes a bid form. So the bid form is typically very detailed, and there is a section for the base bid. The base bid from the contractor includes all the work that you absolutely know needs to be done. Again, I'm going to use the example of a pavement project. During a mill and pave project for pavement, it's absolutely essential, and the project must include the milling of the surface of the pavement and the placing down of a new top course. It may also include in the base bid um, any sort of repairs to catch basins which are apparent and that are known to be needed. Or if, for example, something is going to be added, like speed humps, for example, or an automated gate or something of that to that nature. If you know that the project is going to include it, it goes within the base bid. And then there are extra sections to the bid form that are for unit prices. These are for items that may be needed or typically needed during a certain type of project, but may not be needed. So, and it'll become apparent once construction begins. And I had already given the example of pavement in terms of any kind of base course repairs. Say in a roofing project, it might be some rotted sheathing that's uncovered once the old shingles are taken off. And that might go into the unit price section. You don't know for sure you're going to need to do that during the project. So in the unit price section, there would be a cost for square feet of sheathing replacement. So if that does occur, if it's determined that is needed as approved by the engineer, then there's a cost in there for that already. It's not a surprise cost. It's a known cost per square foot that the owner would be responsible for. And then also certificate of ownership. It's important when a contractor is bidding on a project that you ensure that they are licensed in the state and or they're certified to do the work that's being done. In the case of roofing, there are certain products that are required to be installed by a contractor who is certified, who is trained in the installation of that product, so that you can get the warranty. The product has to be installed correctly for the warranty to be valid. So it's important that you get the proper certifications from a contractor when they are submitting their bid. There are some other items that can be included in specifications. For some of these are for larger projects that an HOA is more often than not involved with. One of them being bonds for a bid. Bond is an amount of money that the contractor places in escrow up front. So if they go bankrupt or run out of money, there is there is money there. That's a predetermined amount that is put into the escrow account. In the case of many HOA projects, this is unnecessary. They're just not large enough projects for that to be the case. There are some other items here. Qualification questionnaire for references. We do include that in the bid. However, you're never going to get a bad reference. However, I will tell you that I have had communities that have taken that reference list, and they've gone, and the board has driven around to look at these various projects to see for a particular contractor whether they like the outcome of the project. So we do ask for that. I have a question here. Do you have a dollar amount that you would recommend a bond on? I do not. That would be really be very dependent on the size of the project or the nature of the project and who the contractor is. That's really kind of also a legal question. I know that when bonds are required, it's typically a percentage of the overall estimated cost of the project. So in terms of an actual dollar amount, I don't have that. I don't have a dollar amount I can give you. So sorry about that. So also included in the written specifications are general conditions. So this would include how will the contractor be paid, and are there phases to the project? So we had, just by way of example, a project that was for replacement of balconies throughout a community, the balcony decking and the railings and so forth. And the payment was based on certain phases of the project. So at a certain amount, there were, I think, about 100 balconies in this community. So payment was based on the percentage of balconies done. So once a third of the balconies were done, everything was inspected and payment was released for that third. There are different ways to structure the payment of to the contractor, and it is dependent on the project. In the case of a very large phased pavement project, say that's being done in 3 phases over 3 years, it's typical to structure payments in terms of when that phase is completed, and the contractor will submit an invoice for work completed with any extras. It'll be reviewed and released for each of the phases. Or sometimes if a pavement project is going to span several weeks, say maybe 2 months, it may be structured where there are monthly payments, monthly invoices submitted. So depending upon the type of project, the size of the project, how it's phased, that payment method can be structured in several different ways. One thing that is typically not included in an HOA contract is are penalties to the contractor for going over the schedule. This is because a lot of the projects have a short time span and are oftentimes weather dependent, and the contractor doesn't always have control over the schedule. However, when they are bidding on a project, they're asked for a general schedule. For example, what would be the duration of the project is a typical question that's asked during the bidding phase, and the contractor may include may say something like 30 days or 15 working days, something to that nature, to give the owner an idea of how long they will be on site to complete the project. Once a contractor is selected, they are asked to provide a start date and a general schedule for the project. So the owner would be provided with a schedule and a timeline for that. And of course, the contractor wants to complete the project in a timely fashion and receive payment in a timely fashion. So there's a motivation for them to complete the project and get it done. So typically with HOA type projects, there is not a very concrete schedule or any penalties for going over. And again, they're typically very weather dependent. If you're doing roofing, if you're doing pavement, depends on the time of year, the temperature, whether it's rained for 2 weeks straight. There are many factors involved that can limit the contractor's progress. And again, insurance requirements are in there. If somebody were to get hurt on site, what is what is in place for that? There should be insurance. Owners will require a certificate of insurance to make sure that the contractor is insured, that their workers are adequately insured. We discussed bond requirements. Indemnifications, we discuss those. If somebody were to be hurt on site, whether it is the engineer, whether it is the contractor, or a resident, what happens in those cases? And the insurance, the terms of indemnification should be clearly defined. Schedule of values, we talked about this, we touched on this a little bit, about base bids and unit pricing and what that means. Sometimes in the case of certain types of projects, there may be uh, a discount for recycled materials. I have not encountered that very much in what I do, but I know there was a project years ago for a gutter replacement where they were seeking a credit for the recycling of the materials that they had used in the past that they were going to discard. I don't know what the outcome of that was, but depending on what the project is, there may be some discounts for recycling, or there may be some incentives through the local government for um, green type of projects. So there's those things as well. So we talked about lump sum. Lump sum is a one lump cost for something to be done, or there may be a unit price. In the case of a pavement project, the there may be for example, if they're going to put in, we know they're going to put in 5 speed humps. We may ask for a per each price for those speed humps, because there may be a decision to add some more speed humps or put in less speed humps. So we might ask for a unit cost for those. Or there may be, if general grading needs to be done in an area, we might ask for a lump sum for that instead. There it is sometimes projects can be bid on based on time and materials. How long will it take the contractor to do something? We may ask for a cost per hour for certain types of labor, or if there are extra materials needed, what would be the contractor's markup on those materials? And again, you may realize a savings, not always, if you combine projects. I had a project, I've had actually many projects in which there are roadways that are owned by the association and driveways that the association is responsible to replace, but the unit owners are responsible for the cost. And they'll try to combine those projects to be done by a single contractor so they can get a better price on both of those projects. So that's oftentimes a way of savings. Another way to perhaps realize savings is when you have a multi-phase project. Say you're doing a roofing project over several years, or you're doing a roadway project over several years. Oftentimes the owner will ask for the option, cost option for everything to be done within a single year, and they can take an educated look at at the potential cost savings of doing that, and it may be within their best interest to do that project all in a single year. Also, what guarantees and warranties are required? Um, Typically for a site work project, there is a warranty period of 1 year that would guarantee the workmanship, or if there are certain types of, say, roofing materials being used, there are certain guarantees and warranties that are specific to those types of materials being used. Those should be specified in the general conditions. And also communication is very, very important during a construction project. When I am involved in contract administration oversight of the project, I always ask that any correspondence should include the owner's representative and the contractor. And then this way, there's no game of telephone, there's no missing information. Everybody has the same information. So communication is very important. Um, but there's also spelled out in the general conditions, a means of communication. Oftentimes, any questions that are related to access to the site, or any kind of questions regarding, say, staging of equipment, that should be directed to the property manager, community manager. Any technical questions or any questions regarding unforeseen conditions should be directed to the engineer. And also the condition should talk about who's responsible for permits and inspections. And typically this falls to the contractor. So before, there are certain types of projects where the contractor is responsible to obtain a building permit, oftentimes with any sort of alterations to buildings or for roofing projects. Or oftentimes anything that has to do with any potentially impacting structural components like balconies or terraces. There's oftentimes a building permit that's required. So the contractor would need to apply for those permits before and be granted those permits before construction can commence, and that would fall to the contractor. There's also, for certain types of projects, inspections by the municipality or by the manufacturer's representative that are required. And the general conditions should spell out very clearly who is responsible to coordinate those. This becomes very important during certain installation of certain types of roofing materials, in that the manufacturer's rep needs to do some inspections to certify that the materials were installed correctly and that the warranty is valid. So again, for some projects, we talked about the bid form, or what the different parts of the contract that are in place. There may be additional guarantees that are involved beyond the warranty. So that would encapsulate the design and the design process and what goes into the contract drawings and into the written specifications. So once the RFP is issued to the contractor and we've requested the bids, now the bids start coming back from contractors. What do we do with those? So when all the bids come in, they should be put into a format where we can compare apples to apples across the board for all the contractors who have returned bids. Kipcon, and I'm sure other engineers do it the same way, is they put together a summary table that shows the different contractors who have responded to the bid, and it also breaks down their quote based on the different portions of the project, or the different items of construction. So you can compare across the board. Say, for example, mobilization costs. You can look in the summary, and you could see what each contractor is charging for mobilization, or for traffic control, or for milling, or for installation of speed humps. You can see You can compare and look across. You can also look at duration of project. Sometimes a contractor may have a great price, but you look at the duration of the project and it is much longer than the other contractors. So the summary gives an idea of what types of questions you want to ask of the contractors. So many times, and I want to stress here the importance of having specifications prepared and having a standard bid form prepared for contractors to bid on. Oftentimes, HOAs will go out to bid and go directly to contractors, and they'll receive 3 different bids with 3 different scopes of work. And they'll ask me to help them select a contractor, and that's just not possible because I don't know why the contractor and any particular contractor selected that scope of work. Or what their bid is based on. So when you have formal specifications and a bid form prepared, all the contractors are bidding on the same items, and you can look and you can see, why is this contractor's price so high? Why is this contractor's price so low? And or any various forms of questions can come out of looking at that summary. So it's very important. There could be, as I mentioned before, a pre-bid conference. So this might entail, say, a walkthrough. Before any contractors give a bid, there might be a date, and I've been involved with several of these where all the contractors attend and we walk through the area that is going to be within the scope of the project. And the contractors have the RFP in hand, so they know what the project will entail. And it allows them to ask questions before they actually bid on the project, so that they are completely clear on what's being bid on. And this is just the process for that pre-bid conference. So all the contractors sign in, so the owner knows who was present. We can, we can take questions from the contractors. We can go over the scope of work, and if they have any questions regarding the bidding process, that should all come out during the pre-construction walkthrough, or I'm sorry, pre-bid walkthrough. So once a contractor is selected, or I'm sorry, before they're selected, there may be some various points of negotiation that you want to clear up with the various bidders. So value engineering. So just to give you an example, several years ago, there was a drainage project in which we were installing, we were specifying several trench drains to be installed in certain areas that were very, very flat in the walkways so that they would drain and they wouldn't ice over in the winter. And one of the contractors, we always welcome any kind of value engineering for projects. One of the contractors had recommended a product that they had, it's a fairly new product that they had used in the past, had given us some examples, some references, and it turned out to be very cost effective for the community association. And they used a certain type of integral trench drain that was very economical for them. And before they entered into the contract, they had presented this, and that was the contract that they went with, and it ended up being very successful. So during that negotiation period is the time for the contractor to present any suggestions for any type of changes to the specifications. So one of the things I mentioned, that summary, sometimes you get all ranges of overall costs from contractors when you're looking at the summaries, but sometimes there's a contractor in there who's really lowballing the bid, and that could happen for various reasons, but it could also be a mistake. So you want to go back and if there is a low bid and a contractor that is reputable and you're considering using them, you want to confirm why that bid is so low. And there's other things you want to discuss as well. Project duration. The contractor might have a great price, but you wonder why they're saying that the project is going to take so long. So these are important questions to ask. Working hours is another one. I have had communities who had concerns about, you know, it was a work in high traffic areas and working hours, and trying to contain those working hours to times when, say, children were not getting off of buses. There have been projects where the owner has asked if the contractor would consider working on a Saturday, because that was one commercial property in particular wanted the contractor to work on weekends because they weren't open then, and that would be the best time for the contractor to come in. So these are all things that need to be considered before a contractor agrees to be involved with the contractor, before you select your contractor. And I'm going to start moving a little faster because I noticed that we're getting up on time. So I'm just going to skip to the salient points. Okay, so let's move into contract administration. Again, if the engineer is involved in contract administration services, again, it's not to tell the contractor how to construct it or what to do. It is to, for the purpose of comparing what is being constructed to the specifications, which are part of the contract. This is how what the contractor agreed to build. Are they actually building that? So in addition to that, we would just during contract administration services, what we do is we would visit the site, and there's different ways of doing this. For some projects, it may require the engineer to be on site at all times. For other projects, the services may entail the engineer uh, visiting the site at key points along the construction pathway to ensure that things are being constructed properly. So this might be during times when certain elements of the construction would be revealed. In the case of pavement, you want to be on there when that base course is exposed, so you can walk with the contractor and mark any areas that may need to be repaired. And then the engineer should provide a field report for each site visit to the owner, so that, and also again, that communication is important, and to copy the contractor on that. So it's very clear what the engineer did when they are on site, and provide any action items and who is responsible for those action items as the project moves forward. If there's any question as to what was intended on the drawings, the engineer should be able to resolve that. Also, if there's any extra work, we talked about extra work outside the base contract. Obviously, there's going to be a cost to that, and there has to be some basis of opinion on that. So oftentimes the specifications will say that if something is to be done that's outside the contract, it needs the engineer's approval, and that would happen during the contract administration phase. And also during contract administration, the invoices from the contractor would be submitted to the owner and copied to the engineer. The engineer would look over those invoices, and because they've been doing field visits, they can certify it as to whether this work has actually been done. Is it ready to be paid for? Is it in good condition? Is it substantially complete? And we talked about consolidating projects for perhaps some cost savings overall on both projects. Incentive and rebates we discussed. Um, Break-even periods have to do oftentimes with materials that are have a lower long-term cost than what you're replacing. For example, retaining walls are a good example. Many communities have wood retaining walls. They have an estimated useful life of about 20 to 30 years, depending on what kind of weather they're facing, and the level of maintenance they've received. But when a community replaces those retaining walls, they will oftentimes consider using segmental block wall, which has a very it's a long-lived component, meaning that there is no if they're maintained, and which they require very little maintenance, so there's very little maintenance cost. They have a very long useful life. So on the reserve study, oftentimes they can be I don't want to say removed, but you can suspend funding for new segmental block retaining walls for a certain period, because they just have a very long useful life. So even though they have a larger cost when being constructed, overall over their useful life, the cost for that particular material is much lower. So how do we minimize risk? Everybody's concerned with risk during construction projects. Anything from cost overruns to um, dropped balls, dropped responsibility, finger pointing. So how do we minimize these risks? And so it's important to clearly understand the role of each party. And this is usually defined in the contract. Your contracts should be very clear as who's responsible for what portion. Again, the contractor is responsible for means and methods of the construction. The engineer is responsible to come up with an economic, cost-effective design, and to make sure that the owners understand what the scope of work is and what the potential risks are in doing the project. It's important to know that the lowest price contractor is not always not always the best alternative for the project. It's tempting to go for the lowest price, but as I mentioned, there's many factors involved in selecting a contractor. We do a separate webinar on that because there are different considerations, but one of them might be just as an overview, the contractor's reputation. How well do you know them? Has anyone worked with them before? Is what is their duration of project? Many different factors to consider. And also you should establish the payment terms upfront. So you should establish a method for determining if the work is substantially complete, if it's correctly completed before releasing payment. So I am a few minutes early here, so I'm going to look at some of the questions. We have some questions in the chat. Let me go back up to the top here. I have a question here. Do you do the pre-bid walkthrough with each individual contractor or all contractors as a group? You can do it either way, and I've been involved in both. You can do a general walkthrough and invite all bidders. That's why it's important to have a sign-in list so you can see who actually attended the walkthrough. Or you can do, I've done both on-site and virtual with individual contractors, where there'll be, say, a certain evening where each contractor has a half-hour slot to make a presentation to the owner, and talk about what they do and why you should select them. So you can do that either way. Yeah, and as a group, that is one of the benefits. I have in the chat here. I had the same question. It sounded like as a group, what would appreciate clarification. The benefit to doing as a group is that everyone hears the same question and everyone hears the same answer. So that is one of the benefits of that. And also, I will tell you, when I've done some group walkthroughs, there have been some suggestions that have come out of the walkthrough from certain contractors as to how to do something a little more economically or do something differently. I had one where there was a retaining wall being replaced and there were some aesthetic concerns, that one particular contractor had some very good suggestions. So that is the benefit of doing as a group. Who is responsible for quote unquote supervision? The contractor is ultimately responsible for their work. They have an interest in doing the project correctly, especially contractors who are regulars within the HOA world. They want you to be happy with the finished project, because they do a lot of work for community associations, and I mean, quite frankly, they don't want a bad review. Whatever professional you are using within the HOA realm will generally have that attitude. So the contractor is responsible for what they construct, and there is a warranty period. So if anything is not done correctly, that warranty kicks in. In terms of the engineer's involvement, again, we are, if you hire an engineer for oversight, we're looking to see, for example, for the pavement, just to give you as an example, when the project is complete, we will ask for the delivery tickets for the asphalt. And we'll look at how much asphalt went into the project, what type of asphalt it was. So we're looking at that information as compared to what we specified in the design. So if that answers your question, hopefully, for supervision of a project. That's all the questions I have here. Does anyone else have any questions? We're at time, but I'll take one more question if somebody has one. All right. Oh, I'm always supposed to give a keyword at the end. So the keyword for today is morning frost. We had morning frost this morning all over everything. It's very, very pretty. It's melting now. But that's the keyword for today for anyone who is seeking CEU credits for this. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Thank you for attending.